Okay, good afternoon. Thank you for coming. It's clear from the audience here that this is a topic of great interest to everyone to come on 4:30 on a Friday afternoon when you could already be at happy hour. So thanks for joining us. Welcome to the Wilson Center. This is the official memorial of President Woodrow Wilson and a nonpartisan think tank. It's a place where we can step back from some of the politics that's almost inescapable right now and take a real look at big policy issues and important things that are going on, such as the reform of Pemex and the energy reform in Mexico. Duncan Wood, the director of the Mexico Institute, couldn't be here today. He's out of town, but he sends his greetings and regrets that he couldn't join. As all of you know, the NAFTA talks are ongoing just outside of Washington here in Arlington. And for anyone watching closely, it's clear that the sticking points in the negotiation are at least as much political as they are economic and sort of real on the ground issues. And in this sense, actually, Mexican energy is a fascinating case. When President Bush, 41, met with President Salinas of Mexico to start conversations about the NAFTA talks that were ahead of them when NAFTA was first put forward, they both put forward issues that couldn't be touched. From the U.S. side, it was immigration. That was something that was not going to be a part of the NAFTA negotiations, that the U.S. said they could not negotiate because of domestic political reasons. And President Salinas, of course, put forward energy as a thing that couldn't be touched based on the Constitution in Mexico, based on the fact that the sector simply wasn't open to private investment, foreign or domestic. But of course, and people really believed, even moving forward, that stayed true, that this was a sacred cow, something that could not be touched, a third rail of politics. But of course, over time, that was proven wrong. When reform of the energy sector did take place with constitutional reform in 2013 and implementing laws shortly thereafter, it was found that this wasn't actually something that couldn't be touched. In fact, it was a sector that could be reformed and has been greatly reformed, has been greatly changed. So here we are today to reflect back on that and look forward. We have here with us to give us an update on energy reform, on Mexico's energy outlook, and the internal reform of Pemex itself, which is, of course, a necessary part of this overall transition for Pemex to be able to collaborate with and to a certain sense, compete with the private industry. Anyway, we're honored and privileged to have with us here today José Antonio González, the Chief Executive Officer of Petróleos Mexicanos. Let me just read a very short bio of his before I pass it over to my colleague, a fellow here at the Mexico Institute, a board member of ours, and of course the former ambassador to Mexico, Ambassador Anthony Wayne. José Antonio González is the Chief Executive Officer of Pemex. Previously served as the Director General of the Mexican Institute for Social Security, the IMSS. At the Finance Ministry, he held several positions, including Undersecretary of Revenue, Chief of Staff to the Minister, Head of the Unit of Coordination with the States, Head of the Unit of Pensions, Insurance and Securities, among others. He was a lecturer and senior researcher at Stanford University, senior economist for Bolivia, Paraguay, and Peru at the World Bank. He has a PhD and master's degree in economics from Harvard University and a BA degree in economics and a BS degree in mechanical engineering from MIT. We're delighted to have you with us. Thanks very much for coming.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure to have you here with us. I had the pleasure of getting to know you at the end of your career at finance, and then as you were one of the very few people to actually survive and make the transition to the Social Security Institute and the hard and good work you did there to bring that to better order. And I knew when you took over this new job the immensity of that task. There's a lot of reorganization of the structure, the people, and the finances, as well as pulling that important stuff out of the ground. So I know you're going to tell us about that. It was an immense job, but I know you've been making some good progress. So please, we look forward to that.
Thank you. Thank you. I want to thank the Wilson Center for the invitation, to Duncan for insisting. It was a long overdue invitation that I come, and to Ambassador Wayne and Ambassador Jones, two very good friends and very close partners to Mexico. Let me try and speak for not too long, so that I can leave times for questions at the end. And let me talk a bit about what we're doing in Pemex. Pemex, we put out a business plan, which is unique for a couple of reasons. First of all, because Pemex usually doesn't do business plans. They do 5-year plans, which are kind of different. And on the one hand, profitability is the guiding principle. On the other hand, one has to recognize that Pemex is a national oil company, and they're called national oil companies for a reason. We face regulated prices. We're the largest tax contributor. We have asymmetric regulation, special labor regime, supply guarantees. We consolidate our finances with the public sector, et cetera, et cetera. And this is important because many friends of mine tell me, well, no, you should run Pemex the way a private company is run. And I always think that if you do that, you're going to get the wrong answer many times. And you have to take into account that we're a bit different. And, we're not alone in the world. There's lots of national oil companies in the world, and you just have to take into account that you have different set of restrictions against it. When I was named, when the president gave me the honor of naming me CEO of Pemex, he dedicated 2 paragraphs to me, and the 2 paragraphs were, get the finances in order, and secondly, accelerate the implementation of the energy reform. And at the time, I didn't really understand exactly what I needed to do. And this has turned out to be prophetic. And this is what we've been doing since I arrived, almost 2 years ago, actually 1 year and 3 quarters. And let me talk about how we have done some of these things. The Pemex is a large company. Even though I was a board member representing the Ministry of Finance, in Pemex, I didn't realize we're one of the 100 largest companies in the world, the largest company in Mexico. Our sales are equivalent to Uruguay's GDP, so it's a big thing. We sell lots of things. And our different divisions are one of the largest companies in the world in and of themselves. So it's a big thing to manage. It's hard to move a big organization like that around. Today, with humility, we can say that Pemex has stable finances. Improvable, but stable. Now, this has been a lot of work here. We had a very large budget adjustment last year. We have taken measures to strengthen our balance, various measures, and the markets have reacted well. There are a couple of new things we have done lately that I want to highlight. One is, for the first time in our history, we're hedging the price of oil. As many of you may or may not know, the Mexican government hedges the price of oil. Pemex didn't. And when I arrived, I thought that was a strange thing to do, because the first thing I had to do was precisely to make a budget adjustment that was 100 billion pesos, which is an incredibly large number. It's 2.5 the budget of the National University, to give you an idea, and we had to cut that. So it was important to try to do this, but then I found out that many oil companies don't hedge the price of oil. But they're different. They have other ways of adjusting. The prices of their shares can move. They can, downsize or upsize faster than we can. So for us, it was very important to do, and we've been very successful at this. This has given certainty to our budget. The price of oil has oscillated at around, our target of 42, and we're not concerned because we don't have to move our budget around this. Secondly, this is strange. We have finished funding our financial needs. We have finished funding Pemex until 2019. This is almost incredible because when I arrived, the price of oil had fallen from 100 in 2015 and 2014 to 18. The week I arrived, the Mexican mix was 18. We didn't have a very large cash balance. We had to look at the cash balance almost every day to make sure that we could pay our obligations. And, after a year, we have managed, the CFO who's sitting here has done a tremendous job at getting the finances in order. And now we don't have to go to the markets to get any funding anymore. We will, but in an opportunistic sense. We will be opportune and I only do it if we find a good opportunity to do that, which is almost incredible that you can pre-fund. A year ago, you don't have enough cash balances, for days or weeks. And then a year after, you can pre-fund all of your obligations for a year and a half. For the first time in 10 years, we posted 3 consecutive positive quarters in a row. That's also a good result for us. We are consolidating the deficit. What you can see is that the deficit has been reduced from about 150 billion pesos to less than 90 billion pesos, a little lower than 90 billion pesos. So that has also helped us in setting up and trying to stabilize the debt for Pemex. This is important to us. We did our business plan that we presented almost exactly a year ago. We tried to do it with realistic assumptions. It was interesting because whenever I was in the Ministry of Finance and Pemex presented a plan, magically Pemex always went back to producing 3.5 million barrels of oil a day. And that doesn't really work. The prices of oil were very optimistic. So the first thing we did was we set up a scenario with realistic prices of oil. So the graph on the left shows that basically what we did was we took the futures market. We took what does the market think the prices will do in the next 5 years? And that's the orange line. And we took ours, which is the dotted line. We just discounted for the quality. Now, what happened is not exactly what we expected. We expected to have a price, or what the markets expected. A year ago, the markets expected the price of oil for 2018 to be 54. It's going to be 46 for next year. So, we had to make an adjustment. The middle graph shows our financial balance. And, we lowered the financial balance from 150 billion pesos to 100 billion pesos last year and to 94 this year, despite the fact that the oil price did not materialize. So we're still going to meet our financial targets despite the fact that the oil price has not materialized. Then the production platform increases slightly over the next few years. You don't see a 3.5 number anywhere. And what we're hoping for, first of all, we met our production target last year. That was the second time in 22 years that Pemex met its production target. Pemex never met its production targets. And we hope the target for this year is 1.944 million barrels a day. We hope that we're going to meet it. We're on target to meet it. And for next year, a marginal increase. We hope that we can produce 1.951 million barrels. So it's almost a rounding error there. But it would be the first time that Pemex increases its production since 2004, which is also an important thing. It shows that the energy reform is happening. The markets have looked at this favorably. When I arrived, the Pemex risk was, I don't know if you guys are financiers, 350 basis points, 320 basis points. Today, it's 120 basis points, so a drop of almost 200 basis points, which is quite a bit. We can borrow at much more competitive rates. And when you have a debt that is $100 billion, it makes a difference. 2% on $100 billion is $2 billion a year. So it's a lot of money that has happened. The rating agencies have turned the outlooks to stable, except for one, and I hope that this continues. So I think we have stable finances in Pemex. Let me talk a bit about the operation of Pemex. And this is where the energy reform, this is the second task that the president told me to do. This is where the energy reform comes in. And most of you know what it is, but let me repeat it because it is such a structural reform that you can say it in one sentence. Before the energy reform, only Pemex was allowed to explore, to drill, to produce, to transport, to commercialize anything that had to do with oil. Nobody else could touch the oil sector. After the energy reform, anybody can do any of these activities, both foreign and domestic, which is remarkable. It's as simple as that. It's as far-reaching as that. And it allows Pemex to form partnerships with any company it wants under certain processes. Now, this is important because I didn't know this, so unless you're an oil and gas person, the oil and gas industry is a partnership industry. And you think to yourself that that is always the case, and it's not. Every time I talk to financial advisors or financial investors, they always go, "Oh, you have partnerships. That's a good thing." I say, how many people here have a partnership? Does your bank have a partnership with? Nobody raises their hand. If you do this at an oil and gas conference, everybody raises their hand. The oil and gas business is a partnership business. And Pemex, before the energy reform, was not allowed to have risk partners. You could contract out, but we were not allowed to have risk partners. And now we can. So that's a huge change for Pemex. Let me talk about Pemex exploration and production. Pemex is the 8th biggest oil producer in the world in 2015. The question that everyone asks is, how are we going to maintain, stabilize, or increase the production platform in Mexico? And why does it keep falling? And the answer is the graph on the left. In 2004, we produced 3.4 million barrels of oil. But out of this, 2.1 came from a single field, Cantarell. It was one of the largest fields in the world. But that field today only produces about 200,000 barrels of oil a day. That's the bad news. The good news is that the non-Cantarell production has increased 54% in 10 years. That's equivalent to 700,000 barrels. And you say to yourself, well, whatever, what is that? That is the entire production of Colombia. So Pemex, in 10 years, is produced outside of Cantarell the amount that Colombia produces as a country. It's a lot. It's not a small achievement. Now, this comes at a price. We used to invest $50 billion pesos in exploration and production, and today we have to invest 250 billion pesos. As I say jokingly, God was generous with Mexico, but he wasn't eternal. He gave us one large field. Now we have to get oil out the way everybody else gets oil out, investing, exploring, and doing a lot of capital expenditures. And it can be done. How? Well, first we're going to concentrate on fields that are profitable for Pemex. And this has meant that the fiscal regime has changed. Secondly, we have an aggressive farm-out strategy. Last year, we farmed out our first deep water field. Just 2 weeks ago, we farmed out 2 onshore fields. We were going to farm out a deep shallow water field that didn't have any bidders. I can talk about that if you want. In January, we're going to farm out our second deep water field, Maximino Nobilis, and we're going to farm out small onshore fields. One of the things that we have to realize is that not every company is a specialist in every type of field. It's interesting, if you were to go, there's a big conference in Houston called CERAWeek, where all the big oil companies in the world go. And people specialize. You can go to a meeting and somebody says, I'm an onshore company, I'm an offshore company, I'm a non-conventional company. And big companies don't dwell on small fields. We're cumbersome. It's hard to do these things. So you find a partner to do it with. So that's what we're going to do with these small fields. Thirdly, we are going to increase, or we have been increasing our reserves, bidding for new bids for new fields. We've won a field in round 1.4 with Inpex and Chevron, who is accompanying us today. And we're very happy with that deal. We won 2 fields with the DEA, the German company, and another field with Ecopetrol, the Colombian company. And this is interesting. You're going from a company that was never used to bidding to a company that bids for its fields. And here I brag a little. One of the large companies came to us and said, we've been watching Pemex's bids. And when Pemex wins, they win by a bit. They don't overbid. And when Pemex loses, they lose by a bit. They're never the last in round. So next time, we want to partner with Pemex because Pemex clearly knows the fields. That's nice because we knew the fields. I didn't know we could translate that into reasonable bids. So that's good. We're happy about that. And we're also changing, I can talk about this if you're interested, new, more incentivized contracts, risk-based contracts. The question in your mind should be, does Mexico have oil? There's no doubt in my mind that the oil is there. This picture shows another cliche. God didn't draw the borders. Those are wells in the United States, and you can draw the border. You can tell where the Rio Bravo or Rio Grande is because that's where the drilling stops. That's not the way nature works. So if there's oil on that side, and if we projected that to the sea, it's the same. You can tell exactly where the border is because that's where the drilling stops. And in fact, our deep water fields that we auctioned off are 200 kilometers east of the coast, but 30 kilometers south of an existing field in the north of the Gulf of Mexico. So the oil is there. There's no question about this. Let me skip this. Let me talk about Pemex Refining. Pemex Refining is a very large company as well. The problem with Pemex Refining is that we have our unscheduled stops are 3 times the industry average. And this causes us to lose a lot of money. What's interesting is why we have these unscheduled stops. And you probably can't read this, but the blue part is because we have hydrogen supply failure. You need hydrogen to refine oil. Trust me on this one. Don't ask me about it because I don't know exactly what it does. What I like, it was giving us a lot of problem, these hydrogen plants. So Pemex has a refinery in Texas, in Houston. So I asked the refinery manager in Houston, how are you dealing with the problems with your hydrogen plant? And his answer was wonderful. What hydrogen plant? I said, well, where do you get your hydrogen? Oh, well, there's a pipeline that goes down the street. I plug into it, I get the hydrogen. So I got worked up. And I said, where do you get your electricity? From the grid. Where do you get yours? I go, well, we have our own electricity generators. And I said, well, we're in trouble. We've been doing this for 80 years, and we did everything. So there are 4 companies in the world that make hydrogen, and Pemex. So we decided that's not a good business. So instead of, we had to revamp our hydrogen plants. Instead of investing about $200 million on each plant, we decided to form a partnership with one of the 4 companies that are good at making hydrogen. They paid us to be our partner. They're going to do the investment, and they're going to supply hydrogen to us 30% cheaper than our cost. You don't need to be a PhD to understand that that's a good business. It's easy. So hopefully what we will do is we have done our hydrogen projects for Tula, Cadereyta, and Madero. That's working. That's going to allow us to concentrate on the major turnarounds for the refineries. The price of gasoline has been liberalized in Mexico, as many of you know, and this has also implied a benefit for Pemex because the transportation costs are now recognized. We're working on product theft, so this should get refining more or less on track in the next few years. Let me finish by talking about infrastructure and new projects. This is also interesting. Look at the maps about pipelines, oil pipelines in Mexico and the United States. You don't need any analysis. We're clearly underinvested in pipelines in Mexico. The U.S. has 27 times the pipeline capacity per square kilometer than we do. Same with storage. The U.S. has 40 times more storage capacity than Mexico and 12 more days of inventory. This is our infrastructure. This is what Pemex thinks it should look like. But I'm sure other people will do other stuff. The infrastructure we need in what people call midstream is about $15 billion in pipelines, storage terminals, gas stations. So the potential here is huge for Mexico. We have begun. We also have done our first partnership in the midstream industry. The American firm Tesoro now is a partner with us in our open season in the Northwest. We're going to have more open seasons in our midstream facilities in the future. So in the end, I think Pemex has tackled the short-run challenges of getting the finances in order, and today we have stable finances. I insist, improvable, but stable. They're not in the best of shape, but they're improvable. And we have begun to harness the energy reform's historic opportunity to form partnerships with people and to open up the entire sector. To give you an idea, the investment commitments from the energy sector alone are $100 million in Mexico. That's a huge number for in general, but for Mexico, it's a huge number, the investment commitments for the next few years. So I think with that in place, we have the opportunity to modernize and remain Mexico's flagship company. So with that, I'll finish, and then we can have a more open dialogue. Thank you. Thank you very much for coming on a Friday afternoon.
Okay, let me ask a couple questions to start, and then we'll go out and ask everybody else. With new partnerships, with farming out different areas, what have the main challenges been? And a lot of them are still developing right now. So what are you learning? You must have different cultures sometimes that are coming together.
Sure. Well, it's hard. I mean, we haven't had a partner for 80 years. Right. So it took us a long time to get the first one out. Since we arrived, it's an interesting story, our first farm out, because I arrived and we had to do this budget adjustment literally the day I arrived. Right. Well, actually, it was the second day. And when we were looking at the budget, there was a line item where it was $13 billion in a deep water project. And even though I'm not an oil expert, I knew that you don't develop deep water projects on your own. But I said, guys, we need to, we're going to cut this. And, you can imagine the entire room went up in arms and said no. And we started getting into a philosophical discussion about whether, Pemex should go into deep water or not, because that was the future. And fortunately, early on in the discussion, I said, well, this is the wrong way of going about it. So all the directors of Pemex were sitting in the meeting room. And I said, fine, let me not get into this discussion. Who has 13 billion pesos to invest in this project? Raise your hand. Nobody raised their hand. I said, point settled. End of story. I don't want to talk about this because we don't have the money. There are other things that we need to do. What's interesting is what happened afterwards. The same engineers that about threw me out the window that day came back to me 2 or 3 weeks later and said, why don't we do a farm out? And that farm out is now Trion. Mm-hmm. It's our first farm out. And we're excited. We're very happy working on this. We're learning a lot. And I think slowly the culture in, Pemex is realizing that partners are a good thing. So, we're moving slowly, slower than I would like, but we're moving. And I think that's happening. Just last week or 2 weeks ago, the engineers came and said, you have to come see, the new drilling platform that, our partner in Trion is. They brought this, and no wonder they're more efficient because look, and they were explaining all of these things to me. So it's exciting. It's exciting, when we weren't able to do this, we didn't have this benefit. And to me, what tells me that we're in the right path is all the oil companies in the world do it. Even much bigger, much stronger companies than Pemex, they have partners. It's a very strange thing because you have very large companies that compete fiercely against each other at the company level. But, I'm making this up, but, the two, I don't know, Chevron and Exxon must have 10 or 20 or 15 partnerships all over the world.
Sure.
So we didn't do that. So we've been working.
Good. Okay, second question. Energy reform is still pretty new. Still some rules being developed in different places. And one of the things I noticed people talking about in a couple of recent articles were rules for sharing fields.
Mm-hmm.
Maybe what are your thoughts about where that is, but also are there other areas where there are still rules being developed in the energy reform?
Yeah, well, we have to. There are international standards for dividing fields, so we are copying the international standards in this, and that's what we're going to do. So I hope that there's not as much controversy around this as this comes along, because these things happen. You saw the map. So countries have learned to divide fields that are borderline. There's always a bit of tension, but now with the new technologies on seismic, seismic imaging and stuff, it's easier to do. So I'm hopeful that will happen. That has come out because there was a big announcement about a very large field that was discovered. It wasn't discovered. We already knew the field was there. It's neighboring, somebody else's acreage, and it's right in the middle of it. I don't know why they divided the field, because we already had a well there, so they should have just moved the line over, but they didn't. So now we're gonna learn to share. But I'm hopeful. I think it'll work out.
Good.
I think it'll work out.
Okay, let's open it up to everybody, to others here. Question. Okay.
Yeah, we can hear you.
Thank you for your talk. Very informative. My name is Joe Rossa. I'm with Strategic Policies here in Washington, and I have a two-part question regarding your strategic plan. I know that for the last year or so, you've been looking at spinning off a lot of the fertilizer companies and production facilities as part of your restructuring.
It's working now, and then people can hear you.
Okay,
speak
thank
in
you.
the
And
other-
so this deals with the fertilizer industry and its production. And I know that you're in the process of spinning off a lot of your production capacity. And the first part of my question is, how's that going? And then the second part of my question is, with this onset of very affordable natural gas as a result of the shale oil, is that impacting your strategic plan as it relates to fertilizer production? Thank you.
Well, it's an issue that we've been analyzing. Fertilizing, it's also interesting. Not many oil and gas companies have fertilizer plants. They have, I don't know, learned or something, but even integrated oil companies are not in the fertilizing business anymore. Again, the fertilizing business is an interesting story about historical, I think, accidents. The first assets in the petrochemical business that were sold in Mexico were the fertilizer plants in the early 90s. But there was a division between basic petrochemicals and non-basic petrochemicals. And it turns out that the division line, which was a legislative division line, included the fertilizer plants as non-essential petrochemicals, but it didn't include the ammonia plants. So ammonia had to stay with Pemex. Most of the fertilizer business have these two plants together. So it never really quite worked as a business in Mexico. So we're exploring getting these two plants together so that these things can become a more conventional fertilizer business, and it can be run. It's not the core business for Pemex, so we're doing all the restructuring, and we'll see. We'll see what's the best way of doing that. The natural gas story is also one of these historical accidents. Not very many people know, but natural gas imports, transports, and commercialization were liberalized in Mexico in 1995. How many importers of natural gas besides Pemex and CFE exist in Mexico? 0. How many gas pipelines that are not backed by Pemex or CFE exist in Mexico? 0. So what is it? If we liberalized it, why isn't it working? And it turns out that the reason this happened was, people kept putting layers on it without looking at the fundamental problem. There was a pricing problem that nobody had realized. And since I'm a bit of a nerd, we found it and we're fixing it. So what I think will happen with natural gas is, I'll give you an example. Gas in the southeast of Mexico was cheaper than in South Texas. That makes very few fields profitable. We're sitting next to the cheapest gas source in the world, and our pricing was even lower. So I'm a firm believer in trade, and I'm sure somebody's going to ask about that eventually. So importing gas is, benefits both of us for now. But again, most of the wells that you saw in the picture are gas wells. So and the geological formation is the same. So eventually, I think we're going to start producing gas at very similar prices that Texas will. And in the meantime, with all the efforts that the CFE has made, we are going to be, we are going to have very large transport capacities for gas in Mexico, so that will allow Mexico to industrialize, fertilizer business included. So that should work.
Great. Question here in the center.
Thank you very much for your presentation. My name is Sergio Sanchez, Executive Director of the Clean Air Institute here in Washington, D.C., working in Latin America. In the 90s, Pemex played a critical role in order to support the efforts to improve air quality in the capital of the country and other parts of the country. So these efforts reflected in the ecological package of Pemex by introducing cleaner gasoline and diesel were really essential. Lately, we have been more concerned because Mexico is late in providing the ultra-low sulfur diesel and gasoline needed to introduce to speed up the introduction of cleaner technologies to keep improving air quality, not just in Mexico City, but in the whole country. So my question is, how is Pemex thinking in partnering with the private sector to speed up this process, and when do you think is that going to happen? Thanks so much.
Well, it sounds like the question is particular on gasoline, and our gasoline standards are the same as Texas. So we import most of our gasoline from Texas, so that makes sense. So there is more we can do, and I think what you're referring to is the fact that we haven't moved in our refineries to supply all of the low sulfur gasoline, but we've made a lot of progress. Actually, the problem is where we're falling a bit behind is in the diesel. We provide low sulfur diesel for all of the cities and the main roadways, just not the rest of the country. We will. That'll happen. It's inevitable, and it's expensive, so it's taking us a little longer to do than we would like, but that's going to happen. Now, the contribution to the environment that Pemex has done in the last couple of years is actually very good. We have reduced flaring, which is a tremendous source of pollution, to less than half in a year and a half of what we had. And we're working on a project that will reduce it even further. So our contributions to CO2 pollution have been tremendous. They've been huge, actually, in the last year and a half. And they've been interesting because the real solution is to install these very expensive compressors, which we're going to install. But just by getting the engineers to say, listen, guys, we can't burn all this gas, we have reduced flaring by about a half in the last year and a half, just by making sure we fine-tune what we have today. And then thirdly, a project I'm pretty proud of is Pemex has pledged, there's a project, we don't run it, there's a project for the conservation of the Lacandonas rainforest in Chiapas. It's the largest area in, actually, this project is bigger than all of the conservation projects in Costa Rica combined. And Costa Rica is very famous for that. I think it's 60% of the size of El Salvador country. So, we decided to pledge quite a bit of money, actually, to conserve that. So I think Pemex is becoming environmentally conscious more and more. So I think we're going to continue to move.
Please.
Hello, my name is Ramiro Santana. I'm from Celaya, Guanajuato. I'm studying chemical engineering. And I have two questions for you. The first one is about what are you doing to face this issue, this big issue of the huachicol? For example, where I'm from, there is a lot of trouble with the crime and the huachicol. And my second question is, as a chemical engineering student, I'm very concerned about all the Pemex troubles. And what is your compromise with the students, from the young engineering students that want to improve the condition of Pemex and work in Pemex? So those are my questions.
Well, the fuel theft story is actually interesting because since I was in the Treasury Ministry, along with the now Treasury Minister, we were concerned about this issue. It's an issue that has been going on in Mexico for quite a bit of time. And one of the issues was, we couldn't get, everybody loses here. Pemex loses, the Treasury loses, the environment loses, and communities just get, the social fabric gets broken. So we started working on this problem when I was at the Treasury, but, then I got distracted on other things. And when I came back, we decided to try to look at the problem differently. And we thought about this since we were there. The objective was to try to catch the thieves when they're stealing. And that's not very effective. What you need to do is look at where they take the product. This is the way they've done. There's a famous study that I studied when I was young, and I haven't been able to get it back, in which in Berkeley, all the bicycles were getting stolen. And there was one group of people who wanted more police. And there was another group who said, just go to those shops in such and such a street. That's where they're taking all the bikes. They closed the shops and the store. They didn't steal the bikes anymore. Here it's the same. So what we have done in the and we decided to see, it's not a unique Mexico problem. I went to see my friends in Colombia. Colombia had a very difficult problem with fuel theft, worse than Mexico's percentage-wise. Not as big because they're not as big a country. And I learned a couple of things. That many of the intuitions that we had were not wrong, but they said something that was interesting. There's not a single measure that's going to fix the problem. Do everything you can and it will be barely enough. Secondly, the oil company plays an important role here because you have all of the information. The problem in Colombia was that they didn't regulate the gas stations. We regulate the gas stations. But let me tell you a couple of stories. I got the database for all the gas stations. Pemex supplies all the gas stations in Mexico. It took me a long time to do this. It took me months to do this, and I was the director general, and they wouldn't give me the data. So once we got the data, we found out that there were gas stations that didn't buy gas from us for months, and they were still selling gas. So we have a group that meets every single week, headed by the Minister of Finance, the Attorney General, their teams, myself and my team, every single week to look at this issue. And we're doing everything. There's not a single measure, there's not a single technology. You have to do everything. And we have found lots of things. Gas stations that didn't buy gas from us. Gas stations that sell more gas than we sell them. Can't happen. But you need to do all the groundwork to get that done. And we're seeing some incipient results already. So we're making progress there. And the education part, Pemex used to be the major, I don't know if it was a spin-off or how it was, of del Instituto Mexicano del Petróleo. With the energy reform, I think it made sense that now we don't hold the majority of the seats. I think we held all of the seats except, one or two that the energy ministry held. Now they left us with one, but we still pay the bill. So, we're not as vocal and we're not as visible as before, but we're still paying the bills. And I'm a firm believer in education. So we started a program, small, for giving, oil-related research prizes in Mexico with UNAM, with the UNAM Foundation. And we have pledged some money there as well. So we're committed. I think it's important for us to develop the human capital there.
Maybe two more questions, here and then right there. You're in the front first.
I'm Bob Hershey. I'm a consultant. What kinds of things are you doing to reduce the gas flaring?
Well, as I said, we're going to have a very large compressor project that is going to be done in a year and a half. But in the meantime, we have the infrastructure that we could increase our compression capacity. We could streamline some of the pipelines so we could take more of the gas out and not flare it. So it was a quick fix, what we did, with existing infrastructure and equipment. But these guys are very creative, and they know everything we have, so they managed to lower our flaring dramatically by a half. It will be diminished by, I think, a half of that, so it'll be almost world standards. So that should be good.
Great.
Hello, my name is Hai Gugaratz. I'm with Argus Media. You mentioned Tesoro in your presentation. I'm curious when and by which process you will offer more storage and logistics capacity to outsiders.
The same process. We're going to do open seasons in which, as you say, as you can see, we're, grotesquely short of storage capacity and transport capacity. But, the regulation has mandated that we have a proportion of it dedicated to an open season. So we're going to decide how much of our capacity can we put out for somebody else to use, and it's going to be auctioned off. Well, as quickly as a few weeks. We're going to do the next rounds. As I always say, the percentage increase from 0 to 1 is infinity. from 1 to 2 is only 100%. So we did the first one, and it took us a very long time. We have delayed the second one, but I think we're going to do this perhaps in a month and a half, and then we're going to start moving slowly in different parts. Yeah.
That's great. Well, thank you very much for being with us, for taking this
No,
time.
thank
And
you. Thank you.
congratulations on the progress so far,
you.
and all the best for continued progress.
Thank you.
you.
Thank you.